Ruth walked slowly down the crowded street, the hot sun beating down on her back. Her shoes were worn and dusty, and her black skirt had faded from too many washes. In her hand, she held a brown envelope filled with copies of her CV. She had been carrying this envelope everywhere for weeks now. It was starting to look tired, just like she felt. Ruth had always believed that if she worked hard and studied well, good things would come her way. She grew up in a small town where her parents struggled to pay her school fees. They sold vegetables in the market and always made sure there was food on the table, even if it was only rice and beans. Her father used to tell her, "Education is the key, Ruth. It will open doors for you." So Ruth listened. She studied hard, passed her exams, and was accepted into the university to study accounting. After 4 years at university and a year of NYSC in a faraway village, Ruth was sure that her life would get better. She dreamed of working in a bank, wearing neat suits, and helping her parents live more comfortably. But after NYSC, finding a job turned out to be harder than she thought. Every day she woke up early, got dressed, and left the small one-room apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother. She spent her days walking from one office to another, handing in her CV and hoping someone would call her back. But nobody called. Each day felt longer than the last. The city was loud and busy, full of people in a hurry. Sometimes Ruth sat by the side of the road and watched people rushing to work, laughing with friends, or buying food from the street sellers. She wondered if her life would ever change. She wondered if her family would always be poor. That morning, Ruth woke up before sunrise. The tap in their yard had stopped working, and there was no water left in the house. Her mother was already awake, sweeping the tiny room they called home. Ruth's younger brother, Sam, still lay asleep on the mat. Ruth filled a blue plastic bucket and a small yellow keg, ready to make the long walk to the stream outside the city. "Be careful, Ruth," her mother said as Ruth tied her scarf. "Don't talk to strangers on the way." Ruth nodded and smiled. "I'll be fine, Mama." The road to the stream was quiet and a little lonely, with bushes growing on both sides. It was a far walk, but Ruth didn't mind. She used the time to think about her plans and pray quietly in her heart. Sometimes she thought about leaving the city to find work somewhere else. But she didn't want to give up. Not yet. She reached the stream just as the sun peeked through the trees. The water was clear and cool, and birds sang in the branches above. Ruth scooped water into her keg, humming a quiet song. She didn't see anyone else around, so she moved quickly, not wanting to waste time. On her way back, Ruth paused for a moment under a big mango tree to rest. She set her bucket down and wiped sweat from her forehead. As she rested, her mind drifted to the banks she had visited the day before. She remembered the polite smiles from the front desk staff, the way the managers glanced at her CV and said, "We'll get back to you." She had left each place with hope, but by evening her phone was still silent. A sudden noise broke into her thoughts. It sounded like someone was running through the bush nearby. Ruth stood up quickly, her heart pounding. She looked around, but couldn't see anyone. The city was dangerous these days, and her mother's words echoed in her mind. She picked up her bucket and hurried down the path. The noise stopped for a moment, then started again, closer this time. Ruth wanted to run, but the water was heavy and she didn't want to spill it. She walked faster, glancing over her shoulder. When she reached the main road, cars zoomed by, and the sound of the city returned. Ruth felt safer. She balanced her bucket and keg and continued walking. She tried to shake off the strange feeling in her chest, but the sound from the bush stayed with her. Back at home, Ruth poured the fresh water into a drum in the corner of the room. Her mother smiled gratefully. "Thank you, my daughter." Ruth just nodded. She was tired, but she knew she had to keep trying. Tomorrow she would visit more banks. She would wear her best clothes and carry her brown envelope, hoping for a miracle. The next day, Ruth woke up early again. She stretched on her old mattress, feeling the aches in her legs from yesterday's long walk. Sunlight crept into the room through the torn curtain. Her mother was already up, boiling water for Pop. Sam, her brother, snored softly, curled up in a faded blanket. Ruth wanted to visit more banks today, but first she had to fetch water. She took the blue bucket and yellow keg, tied her scarf tightly, and set off before the city got busy. The air was cool and fresh. The only sounds were birds singing and the far-off hum of cars. As she walked, Ruth remembered the strange noises she'd heard in the bushes yesterday. The memory made her uneasy. She looked around, but the road was empty, and the sun was coming up fast. Still, she walked a little quicker, eager to reach the stream and return home. The path to the stream was narrow, with tall grass on both sides. Ruth walked carefully, listening for any sounds. She filled her keg at the water's edge, then splashed her face to wake up. For a moment, she just listened to the gentle sound of water flowing and birds calling overhead. It calmed her nerves. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a loud snap behind her, like a branch breaking. Ruth froze. She turned slowly, holding her breath. For a few seconds, nothing moved. The bush was quiet. Maybe it was just a goat or a bird, she told herself, but her heart wouldn't stop pounding. She hurried back to the path with her heavy bucket, looking over her shoulder every few steps. As she walked under the same big mango tree from yesterday, the noise came again, this time louder and closer. Suddenly, something crashed through the bushes right in front of her. Ruth screamed and almost dropped her bucket. She stumbled backward, ready to run. But then she saw it was a person, a young man. He looked terrible. His shirt was torn and his face was scratched. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was covered in dust and mud. He staggered forward a few steps and then fell right at Ruth's feet. For a second, Ruth just stood there, too shocked to move. Then her fear turned into worry. The young man was gasping for breath. His lips were dry and his eyes were wide with panic. "Help, please," he whispered. "Water." Ruth bent down and poured some water from her keg into the lid. She carefully helped him drink. The man swallowed greedily, coughing between gulps. "Are you okay?" Ruth asked, her voice shaking. "What happened to you?" He tried to speak, but his voice was weak. They chased me. I ran." Ruth looked around, afraid someone might be watching. "Who chased you?" He shook his head, too tired to answer. He tried to sit up, but almost fainted. Ruth knew she couldn't leave him there. If she walked away, wild animals or whoever chased him might find him. She looked down the road. It was too far to carry him home, and he was too weak to walk. Ruth thought quickly. There was an old wheelbarrow behind a neighbor's house, sometimes used to carry heavy loads from the market. She left her bucket beside the tree and ran to borrow it. The neighbor, Mama Rose, was sweeping her yard. When Ruth explained, she quickly agreed. "Bring him here, child. I'll help." Ruth wheeled the barrow back to where the man lay. With Mama Rose's help, they lifted him gently into the wheelbarrow. He groaned softly, but did not wake up. Ruth felt a rush of fear and responsibility. Who was this stranger? Was he dangerous? What if someone thought she had hurt him? But Mama Rose just nodded. "You did the right thing, Ruth. Let's get him inside." At Ruth's house, her mother was shocked to see Ruth and Mama Rose pushing a half-dead stranger in a wheelbarrow. Sam ran to help, his eyes wide with curiosity. They laid the young man on a mat. Ruth's mother brought clean water and wiped his face. Ruth spooned a little pop into his mouth. He slept for hours, barely moving. All day, Ruth's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why was he in the bush running for his life? Was it safe to help him? But she remembered the panic in his eyes and the way he had whispered for help. Ruth decided not to tell anyone else, not yet. She would help him, at least until he was strong enough to talk. As night fell, Ruth sat beside the stranger, watching him breathe. The stranger slept the rest of the day and through most of the night. Ruth kept checking on him. Sometimes he would wake up and mumble, but most of the time he was too weak to say anything. Ruth's mother and Sam were worried. They whispered in the kitchen while Ruth made sure the stranger had water and wiped his forehead with a damp cloth. "Do you think he's dangerous?" Sam asked that evening as Ruth boiled some yam for dinner. Ruth shook her head. "I don't think so. Look at him, Sam. He's too tired and hungry to hurt anyone." Her mother sighed. "We can't just keep a strange man here forever, but we can't throw him out either." "I'll watch him," Ruth promised. "Let's just help him until he's strong enough to go." That night, Ruth barely slept. She kept thinking about the look of fear on the man's face. She wondered who was chasing him and if they would come looking for him at their house. But the city was noisy, and people always minded their own business. Maybe nobody would notice one more tired, sick person in their small home. The next morning, Ruth woke up to the sound of coughing. She ran to the small sitting room where the stranger was struggling to sit up. She hurried to help him, placing a pillow behind his back. He looked at her with tired, grateful eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Ruth smiled and brought him some water. He drank slowly, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Do you remember your name?" she asked quietly. The man nodded. "David." Ruth felt a small sense of relief. At least he could remember something. "David, I'm Ruth. That's my mother, and that's my brother Sam. You're safe here." David nodded again. "Thank you, Ruth. I was running. Some bad people were after me. They blocked my car, and I escaped into the bush." Ruth's mother listened from the kitchen. She came closer, holding a bowl of warm pop. "You need to eat something," she said kindly. David took a few sips and closed his eyes, too tired to eat more. Ruth could see his hands were trembling. His clothes were dirty and torn, and his shoes were missing. As the day went on, David told them little bits about what happened. He said he worked in a bank, but he didn't say which one. He didn't talk much about his family or where he lived. Ruth could tell there were things he was still afraid to say. Each time someone knocked on their door, Ruth's heart jumped. She wondered if the bad people David spoke about would come looking for him. But nobody came, except neighbors and street vendors. That afternoon, Mama Rose visited to check on David. "He looks better," she said, touching his forehead gently. "He just needs rest and food." Ruth nodded. "He's getting stronger, I think, but he's still scared." "Sometimes it takes a long time to trust again," Mama Rose said. "You're doing a good thing, Ruth." Ruth smiled, feeling proud but also scared. She wanted to help, but what if they got into trouble? She didn't know what else to do, so she just kept caring for David, hoping things would work out. A few days passed. David grew stronger. He could sit up and eat solid food. Sometimes he would look out the window with a faraway look in his eyes. Ruth saw the sadness and worry there. One night, while Sam was sleeping and her mother was outside, Ruth sat beside David. "David," she said softly, "when you're strong enough, do you want me to help you get to the police? They can help you." David nodded slowly. "Yes, but I need to make sure it's safe. I'm afraid." Ruth reached for his hand. "You're safe here. When you're ready, I'll help you." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you, Ruth. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she said, smiling. "Anyone would have done the same." David shook his head. "Not everyone is kind. You could have left me there." Ruth thought about that. She remembered the fear she'd felt, but also the hope she'd seen in his eyes. "I just did what felt right." That night, Ruth felt a mix of hope and fear. She knew David's trolls were not over. She worried about what would happen when he left, or if the people chasing him ever found out where he was. But she also felt strong, braver than before. She had helped someone in need. David woke early on the 5th day, feeling stronger than he had since he escaped the kidnappers. The wounds on his arms had started to heal, and the shaking in his hands was almost gone. Ruth noticed his color returning and smiled as she served him a plate of bread and fried eggs. "Eat well," she said. "You need your energy." David took a deep breath. He could finally think clearly. His mind was racing with memories of the attack, how the men blocked his car on that lonely road, how he barely escaped into the bush, and how he spent days hungry and scared. As Ruth's family sat together for breakfast, David thanked them for everything. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "I will never forget your kindness." Ruth's mother waved her hand, smiling gently. "We just did what was right. God will reward you, my son." Ruth's heart filled with hope. For the first time in months, their tiny house felt warm and happy. Even Sam, who was usually quiet, laughed as David shared a joke about his messy hair. But David knew he couldn't hide forever. He needed to get back to his family. He needed to find out if the kidnappers were still searching for him. Most importantly, he had to report everything to the police. "Ruth," he said as he finished eating, "can you help me get to the police station? I think it's time." Ruth nodded. She knew the station wasn't too far from their house, but she worried about David's safety along the way. "Let's go together. I'll show you the way." Ruth's mother wrapped some extra food in a small bag for them. "Be careful, both of you," she said. "Go straight there and come home quickly." The city was already busy. The sun was high, and buses and taxis filled the noisy streets. Ruth led David down the back roads, away from the crowds, just in case anyone was looking for him. David wore a borrowed cap to hide his face. As they walked, Ruth's heart raced with worry and excitement. She glanced at David, wondering who he really was. At the police station, David told the officers his full name for the first time. "My name is David. I am the general manager at Best Bank, Nigeria. 4 days ago, a group of men kidnapped me on my way to work." The police officers jumped up in shock. They started asking him many questions. Where had he been? How did he escape? Who did this to him? David answered as best as he could, describing the car, the road, and the moment he ran into the bush. While the officers made calls and wrote reports, Ruth waited in the corner, holding her breath. The room buzzed with noise as the news traveled through the station. One officer turned on the TV. There was David's photo on the screen, and the news reporter said, "David, missing for days, may have escaped his kidnappers. Search continues." David's hands shook as he saw his own face on the TV. "My family, they must be so worried," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't worry, sir," the officer replied. "We will contact them right away. You are safe now." Soon, David's family arrived with the police. His mother hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. His father shook Ruth's hand and thanked her over and over. The police promised to investigate and to protect David. Ruth stood back, watching the scene, her heart pounding with happiness and confusion. As the station filled with reporters and relatives, Ruth felt small. She slipped out quietly, not wanting to make a scene. She thought about everything that had happened. The day she found David in the bush, the way he had trusted her, the risk she and her family had taken. She wondered if she would ever see him again. That evening, at home, Ruth's family celebrated with a simple meal. Even Mama Rose joined them, bringing a loaf of bread and a story about angels walk among us. Ruth smiled, but inside, she felt unsure. She missed David already, but she was proud too. She had helped someone in trouble. Later that night, Ruth lay in bed thinking about her life. She still had no job, no call from any bank, but now everything felt different. She had courage she didn't know she had. She had hope. In a big, beautiful house across the city, David's family also celebrated. David stood by his window, thinking about Ruth, the brave girl who risked everything to save a stranger. He knew he had to thank her properly. Days passed after Ruth helped David return to his family. She waited, half hoping and half afraid, to hear from him. Life went back to its old rhythm. She woke early, fetched water, swept the small room, and searched for work. But things felt different now. Ruth felt stronger and more hopeful, even though nothing much had changed. Every evening, after dinner, Ruth sat by her phone. She stared at the screen, waiting for a call or a message, but the phone stayed silent. Sometimes she wondered if David remembered her. Maybe, after seeing his rich family again, he would forget the poor girl who saved him in the bush. Still, Ruth did not regret her decision. Helping David was the right thing to do. Then, one bright morning, as Ruth was washing her clothes outside, her phone rang. The sound startled her so much that she dropped a wet shirt in the dirt. Her heart pounded as she picked up the phone and answered with a shaky, "Hello?" "Hello, Ruth. It's me, David," the voice on the line said. Ruth's knees felt weak. She sat down on a bench, clutching the phone to her ear. "David, are you all right?" David laughed softly. "I am all right, thanks to you. My family is safe, and the police are still working on the case. I just wanted to hear your voice and thank you again." Ruth smiled, feeling a warm glow in her chest. "You don't have to thank me, David. I'm just glad you're safe." "I do have to thank you," David replied, "and I want to see you. Would you come to my office tomorrow morning? I want to talk to you in person." Ruth's eyes widened in surprise. She hesitated for a moment, then agreed. "Okay, I'll come." After ending the call, Ruth ran inside to tell her mother and Sam. They were just as surprised as she was. Her mother hugged her tightly. "God will bless you, my daughter. Go and see him. You never know what doors this may open." The next morning, Ruth dressed in her neatest clothes, a simple blouse and skirt. She brushed her hair carefully and polished her shoes. She tucked her brown envelope with her CV under her arm, just in case. As she walked through the city, her heart fluttered with nerves and excitement. David's bank building was big and shiny, with tall glass doors and guards at the entrance. Ruth had walked past it many times before, always wishing she could work there. Today, she took a deep breath and walked inside. At the reception, a smartly dressed woman greeted her. "Good morning. How may I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. David," Ruth replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please wait here," the woman said, giving Ruth a kind smile. After a few minutes, David appeared. He looked different in a crisp suit, but his eyes were just as warm as before. He shook Ruth's hand and led her into his office. "Ruth," he began, "I can never repay you for what you did. You saved my life. My family and I are forever grateful." Ruth blushed and looked down at her hands. "I just did what anyone would do." David shook his head. Not everyone would risk their own safety to help a stranger. He paused for a moment, then continued. "Ruth, I want to offer you a job at one of my bank branches. It comes with a good salary, an official car, and a comfortable apartment. You deserve it." Ruth gasped. She could hardly believe her ears. "Me? Are you sure?" David smiled. "Yes, you have the heart and courage that any good team needs. Besides, you studied accounting, didn't you?" Tears filled Ruth's eyes as she nodded. All her hard work, all the rejection, and all the worry seemed to disappear in that moment. Her dreams, which once felt so far away, were now within reach. David handed her an official letter. "Take your time and read this. The job is yours if you want it, and if you ever need anything, my doors are always open to you." Ruth could only whisper, "Thank you." When Ruth left the bank that day, the sun seemed to shine brighter. She walked through the city with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She thought about her mother and Sam, about the many times she'd felt hopeless, and about the way a single act of kindness had changed everything. That night, her family celebrated with laughter and singing. Even neighbors stopped by to congratulate Ruth. She couldn't stop smiling. But far away, at a police station, officers were busy with the case. They had arrested a few men linked to the kidnapping. Ruth woke up early on her first day at her new job. She could hardly believe this was real. For years, she had dreamed of working in a bank. Now, because of her kindness, she had a good job, a place to stay, and even an official car waiting outside. As she dressed in her neatest blouse and skirt, she thought about all the hard days when she wanted to give up. Today, everything felt new and full of hope. Her mother hugged her tightly before she left. "God is with you, Ruth. Make us proud." Sam waved and grinned. "You're a big woman now, Sister Ruth." The drive to the bank felt magical. The city looked different through the window of her new car. She smiled at everyone she passed, feeling both nervous and excited. When Ruth arrived at the bank branch, the staff welcomed her kindly. Her new boss showed her to her office, a small, neat room with a desk and a chair by the window. Ruth settled in quickly. She worked hard, learning everything she could and helping the customers who came each day. Soon, her coworkers noticed how helpful and humble she was. People liked her smile and her polite way of speaking. Whenever she felt nervous, Ruth remembered her mother's words and straightened her shoulders. One afternoon, a week after she started, Ruth received a message from David's secretary. She was asked to visit his main office. Ruth felt her heart beat faster. She checked her hair and made sure her shoes were clean before leaving for David's office. When she arrived, David was waiting for her. He stood up and smiled warmly. "Ruth, I wanted to see how you're settling in." Ruth smiled back. "I'm enjoying my work, sir. Thank you so much for this chance." David shook his head. "You don't need to call me sir, Ruth. You're a friend. I'll always be grateful for what you did for me." They talked for a while about her job, her family, and her dreams. David told her how his family was doing and how grateful they were to have him safe at home. As they spoke, Ruth felt comfortable, as if they had known each other for a long time. There was a gentle understanding between them, a quiet respect. Before Ruth left, David said, "If you ever need help or even just a friend to talk to, I am here. Don't forget that." "Thank you, David," Ruth replied, meaning every word. That evening, as Ruth rode home in her car, she watched the sun setting over the city. She thought about how much had changed in such a short time. She remembered the days when she had almost lost hope, when life felt unfair and difficult. Now, because she chose to help a stranger, everything was different. Ruth's mother and Sam welcomed her home with hugs and laughter. The small house was filled with joy and gratitude. Neighbors stopped by to greet her and bring small gifts. Ruth felt like she was finally living the life she had always prayed for. As Ruth lay in bed that night, she thought about the journey that brought her here. She realized that sometimes the biggest blessings come from the simplest acts of kindness. She had helped someone without expecting anything in return, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, across the city, the police were still working on David's case. They had arrested several suspects who had tried to kidnap him. For days, the suspects refused to say who sent them. But finally, after many questions and investigations, the truth came out. A police officer rushed into David's home one evening, his face serious. David and his family gathered in the living room, anxious to hear the news. "We have arrested the person who planned your kidnapping," the officer said. David's mother gasped. His father stood up. "Who is it?" The officer took a deep breath. "It was your wife, sir. She was behind it all." For a moment, the room was silent. David's face turned pale with shock. He could hardly believe it. The woman he trusted most had betrayed him. Ruth, who was safe at home, did not know about this news yet. But the story was not over. Something even bigger was waiting to happen. Watch out for part 2.